This is the history of Lithuania. Hello everyone, my name is Lucas.
And my name is Paulus.
Welcome to the podcast about the history of Lithuania. The first episode is a bit of a pilot for the both of us, and of course we will just try to give you a quick rundown so that you know what to expect in the future. Thus, it will be super simplified. Hope you enjoy.
The early history of Lithuanians stretches back to the Stone Age, when hunter-gatherers first arrived to the Baltic lands by exploring new hunting grounds. After agriculture emerged during the 3rd millennium BC, the first Lithuanian people, known as the Balts, settled across the lands stretching from the Baltic Sea to modern Moscow. It took more than 1,000 years for local tribes to assimilate and give rise to distinct ethnic Baltic tribes, differentiated by their unique traditions. During the rise and fall of ancient Greece, the tribes had little contact with southern nations due to their distance from the Mediterranean. This, of course, prolonged the Bronze Age for the tribes, preventing widespread adoption of Greek and Roman cultural, scientific innovations. However, the contact they did have was through trade, most importantly, through the Amber Road. The trade of amber also dates back to the Stone Age and reached its peak during the Roman Empire times, where it was regarded as a status symbol, fetching a good price in the Mediterranean nations and beyond. This caused the Amber Road to emerge as a significant trade artery to the European north. The Balts traded commodities such as animal fur, honey, and wax in exchange for Roman glass, brass, gold, and other non-ferrous metals. However, the significance of amber was lost to time. After the Roman Empire's collapse, the interest in amber did not re-emerge until the late 19th century. The Baltic tribes were pagans before becoming Christians. The Balts believed in a polytheistic religion, tightly knit with nature, mythology, traditions, and celebrations. In fact, the first known mention of the Lithuanian tribe was during an attempt to baptize the nation.
Technically speaking, the term Lithuania did not come into existence until the 11th century. The first mention of the word Lithuania, or its earlier form Litua, can be found in the Annals of Quedlinburg, dating back to 109. It was recorded that Bruno of Corfurt arrived in Lithuania with the intention of spreading Christianity, but was met with a violent end as he was promptly decapitated by the local pagans. There are some aspects of Lithuania's history that are often overlooked, and we will explore them in future episodes. Like many coastal lands in the Baltic Sea, Lithuania was also subject to Viking invasions. It is generally believed that while the Lithuanians were raided by the Vikings, the latter did not have any intention of launching a large invasion due to the country's relative poverty and sparse population, which basically just tells us that Lithuania was not a very rich country from the get-go. In later times, from the 11th century, the Ruthenians became the greatest enemy of Lithuania. There are even some claims that Lithuanians paid tribute to the rulers of Ruthenia. But as the 12th century came to an end, both Ruthenia and Novgorod found themselves threatened by the growing power of Lithuania. Clashes between Lithuania and Poland also occurred during this period, but they were never escalated into a larger war, as they were separated by a tribe of Utvingians. By the end of the 12th century, Lithuania had built an organized army primarily used for raiding, which eventually led to a power struggle and an emergence of the Grand Duchy of Lithuania in the early 13th century. Around that time, a highly significant figure entered the scene, an ambitious duke named Mindaugas. He is considered the grand unifier of Lithuania and was the first and only Lithuanian king ruling in the mid-13th century. Despite a short rule, Mindaugas played a crucial role in the development of Lithuania. He followed a strong arm approach, going from tribe to tribe, conquering them by force, and those who resisted were either killed or enslaved. Initially, he declared himself the first Grand Duke of Lithuania, but his ambitions drove him to become a king, and after agreeing to be baptized, which was highly unusual for the time in Lithuania, he was promptly given the title of king by Pope Innocent IV. However, Mindaugas' actions had created numerous foes. The story of Mindaugas is much more intricate and fascinating than we can cover today, but at least the general history is as we have explained here. In the end, he was simply killed along his two sons. Following Mindaugas, numerous other rulers took his place, but the first notable one emerged at the start of the 14th century, the Grand Duke Gediminas. He had called for Christianization and is credited with establishing Vilnius, the historic capital of Lithuania. Gediminas was a capable diplomat, a trait few Lithuanian rulers possessed before him. He also sought to modernize Lithuania with his diplomatic skills. He started the rule of Gediminaičių dynasty in Lithuania, later indirectly starting the prominent Jogailaičių dynasty, who ruled both Poland and Lithuania for many years to come. Before the Christianization of Lithuania, most of its lands were ruled by an interesting yet ultimately ineffective diarchy of Kęstutis and Jogaila. A diarchy is a type of ruling system where two rulers are bestowed with ultimate power, which was very unusual for that time. After the death of Algirdas, his son, Jogaila, was elected to come into power, but Jogaila perceived Algirdas as a growing threat and started a plot against him.
In the aftermath of the family feud among the ruling descendants of Gediminas, Jogaila, later known as King Vladislav II of Poland, emerged as the sole ruler of the Grand Duchy of Lithuania at the end of the 14th century. He achieved this by cunningly striking a political agreement with the militaristic Teutonic Order, which also obligated him to baptize Lithuania within 4 years. At that time, Lithuania stood as the last remaining pagan kingdom in Europe, enduring more than a century of crusades. Finding a solution for peace was crucial. On the other side of the border, the Christian kingdom of Poland sought a king to marry their queen Jadwiga. The paths of Poland and Lithuania had converged, and they began a shared history through the marriage of their rulers, forming a personal union signified by the Union of Krevo. The following summer, the newly Christian King Jogaila participated in mass conversion and baptism ceremonies of the Lithuanian common people. This, however, caused a power vacuum in the Grand Duchy, which sparked a civil war for power. Vytautas, the son of Kęstutis, from whom Jogaila had seized power, had successfully re-established control over the Grand Duchy of Lithuania by selling Samogitia to the Teutons. Vytautas later achieved numerous militaristic feats in the eastern lands, most notably the Battle of Smolensk, earning him the title of Vytautas the Great. However, the power-hungry Teutons continued their attacks on the Polish and Lithuanian lands, even though the pretext of Christianizing the nation was no longer valid. This resulted in one of the biggest battles in European medieval history, the Battle of Grunwald, where Lithuanian, Polish, and Teutonic forces clashed together, which we will discuss more in depth in a later series. Nevertheless, the goal of preventing further crusades had been achieved. Having secured peace externally, the Grand Duchy of Lithuania enabled nobles, the second estate of the realm, to prosper.
Each country has its own name for their nobility. The Germans have their barons and grafs, the French have marquises and dukes, and Lithuanians had simply bajori. Roughly translated, it meant ready to fight. This term reflected the essence of the Lithuanian nobility and later the Lithuanian Polish Commonwealth, their focus on martial prowess. It is widely believed that the Commonwealth had the biggest percentage of nobility in Europe. Out of the 800,000 people living in the Commonwealth at the time, around 10% were nobles. Amongst all the noble families, the Radvilos stood out as one of the most prominent. Radvilos had deep roots in Lithuanian heritage, dating back to the times of Mindaugas, the first king of Lithuania. They were one of the largest landowners, boasting an impressive 23 castles and over 2,000 estates. Some of these properties still stand today, scattered throughout Lithuania and Poland. The Radvilų Palace in Warsaw now serves as the presidential estate. There is much more to be said about the Lithuanian nobility, but we will delve deeper into it in later episodes. We will explore what it meant to be a noble in Lithuania, its significance in the broader European context, and the legacy they left behind. For now, let us move on to discussing the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, also known as the Republic of Two Nations.
At the end of the 16th century, the Grand Duchy of Lithuania found itself on the defensive against the Grand Duchy of Moscow. This resulted in the loss of many territories, a weakened economy, and the looming threat of Russian occupation. This also strained its relationship with Poland, which had been providing economic and military aid to Lithuania without receiving anything in return. Žygimantas Augustas, or Sigismund Augustus II, the last descendant of the Jogailians, sensed the impending danger of a political collapse, not only for the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, but also for Poland, as he had no heirs to inherit the personal union, and if Lithuania fell, Poland would be next. To address this situation, Sigismund Augustus II called upon the mayors of Lithuania and Poland, along with emissaries from across Europe, to a Grand Sejm to discuss the Union of Lublin. The aim was to unite the two nations into the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth under a single elected monarch, a common senate, and a parliament. This marked the beginning of a new chapter in Lithuanian history, characterized by a unique political system known as the Golden Liberty. This system's crucial elements included mayor equality, ability to federalize, and veto power, even for decisions made by the monarch. The Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth also adopted the first known constitution in Europe. During this time, Lithuania experienced a renaissance, with cultural and technological innovation flourishing at its newly Jesuit-founded Vilnius University. The Lithuanian language gained prominence in written works and wider education for the people. While it was a liberal and a democratic age for its time, the next 200 years saw the lands of the Commonwealth become a battleground for wars fought between Russia and Sweden. This led to political chaos, an example of which was the mute parliament. At the beginning of the 18th century, Sejm was unable to perform its duty due to being surrounded by Russia's soldiers. This marked the beginning of the end for one of the largest states in contemporary Europe.
Right after the mute parliament, or in Lithuanian, Nebylusis Seimas, during the remaining 30 or so years of the Commonwealth's existence, numerous reforms and attempts to restore the state were introduced. However, the severe influence and interference of Austria, Russia, and Prussia posed insurmountable challenges. In 1772, the first partition occurred, followed by two more in the future. The details surrounding the partitions are very intricate, but to summarize, an internal conflict, wars with other countries, and the ambitions of foreign rulers led to their decision to annex and subjugate the Commonwealth. The second partition, which happened around 20 years later from the first, proved to be the most devastating, taking away nearly 50% of the Lithuanian Polish lands and shattering any hope of restoration. Finally, in 1795, the third and final partition occurred, leading to the dissolution of the Commonwealth. Lithuania, as we knew it, was absorbed by the Tsarist Russia for many years to come.
Following the partitions of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, the Russian Empire took control of the majority of Lithuania. Soon after, Napoleon Bonaparte's Grand Army marched towards Moscow, and although he was initially seen as a liberator, his troops were routed shortly after the failed invasion. During this time, Adomas Mickevičius, or Adam Mickiewicz, and other writers produced works that influenced the foundations for the upcoming Lithuanian national revival, crucial to maintain a national identity under occupation. Their writings romanticized the Lithuanian countryside, past traditions of the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, and the significance of local culture. While the first years of occupation were not marked by oppressive rulings, the internal autonomy of Lithuania gradually eroded under the Tsar's rule, leading to two major uprisings. Although these uprisings ultimately failed and resulted in harsh repression of the nation, the Lithuanian language and ideals endured, thanks to heroic book smugglers and the increasing literacy of Lithuanians. Despite the Tsar's attempts to suffocate national movements and russify the nation by closing cultural, educational institutions, prohibiting written works in Latin characters, Lithuanian and Samogitian dialects, the Lithuanians managed to resist the Russification. In fact, the Lithuanian language and literary works played a pivotal role in sparking nationalistic ideas which centered around the Lithuanian linguistic identity. It gave Lithuanians confidence to start an independence movement at the beginning of the 20th century. A significant milestone of the movement was the Great Assembly of Vilnius, which united the efforts to achieve autonomy for the Lithuanian nation from the Russian Empire. Ultimately, before the outbreak of the Great War, Lithuanians had established a modern national identity and were actively striving for self-rule.
The modern state of Lithuania, adopting democracy before later falling to its own dictatorship, like many other countries in Europe at the time, emerged in 1918, right after World War I. Russia's weakened state and internal conflicts left them in no position to pay much attention to Lithuania. The path to independence was very long and complex, but in short, after being occupied by Germany, and with the encouragement for an alliance or independence, Lithuania was on the verge of returning to a monarchy, with a German-appointed king. However, the king withdrew his offer only 3 months later, on November 16, 1918, after significant historical events. 20 council members signed the Declaration of Independence. It marked the first official Lithuanian independence in 123 years of Tsarist rule. During the short 22 years of independence, Lithuania achieved significant progress. Initially, the country had to fight and drive out foreign armies, including the Bermontians, remnants of the Russian army, and Poland, with which intense relations persisted until the Soviet occupation in 1940. This was mainly due to the Polish-occupied lands and especially the region of Vilnius, and thus Lithuania had to designate Kaunas as the temporary capital. Regarding internal affairs, Antanas Smetona is considered the first president of Lithuania, taking office in 1919. But he was replaced by a conservative candidate soon in 1920. However, Smetona later staged an armed rebellion in 1926, overthrowing the government and re-establishing himself as a sole dictator until 1940. Despite being an authoritarian regime, Smetona's dictatorship is often referred to as the Velvet Dictatorship. The reason for that being it was relatively tame compared to other dictatorships of the time. Notably, while some political opponents were still dealt with, rebellions were often handled peacefully, and Smetona occasionally granted concessions to appease the crowds. During Smetona's rule, Lithuania faced a new threat in the form of the Soviet Union, against which it ultimately failed to resist. More on what decisions, why those decisions were made, and when they were made, we will talk in future episodes.
Before the outbreak of World War II, the secret code of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact between Russia and Germany signed away Lithuania to fall under Soviet influence. Lithuania was presented with an ultimatum by the Soviet authorities: either allow the entrance of the Red Army peacefully or face the Red Army's aggression. This ultimatum marked the end of Lithuania's independence and ushered in an age of occupation, terror, and suffering under both German and Soviet dictators. Efforts of Lithuania's Sovietization began swiftly, with land, enterprises, and banks being nationalized without a proper plan in place. This led to severe shortages of goods during the switch. Any Lithuanians opposing the change were taken care of by deporting them to gulags in Siberia. When Operation Barbarossa started, some Lithuanians initially welcomed the Germans as liberators, but the German occupation soon brought harsh policies, including forced labor and the Holocaust, wiping out 90% of Lithuania's Jewish population. After the war, when the Soviets regained control, a period of terror ensued, with nationwide deportations affecting nearly 5% of the population. Despite this, resistance fighters waged a partisan war whose consequences and heroes are still a hot topic being discussed in current times. Between Stalin's death and Mikhail Gorbachev's perestroika reforms in the mid-1980s, Lithuania operated as a Soviet society with its repressions and peculiarities. Our grandparents still able to recall the times. In the final stages of the occupation, Lithuania experienced a rebirth as a nation, being allowed to voice out democratic and national rights ideas in movements led by Sąjūdis. The Baltic Way, a powerful demonstration by the Baltic states, expressed our desire for freedom from foreign powers, emphasizing that the quest for independence was not just a political issue, but a moral imperative.
In 1990, Lithuania emerged from 51 years of Soviet rule, facing numerous challenges on its path to independence. The main reason behind the historic moment were the collapsing Soviet Union, as well as the shifting global sentiment, especially amongst European powers, which increasingly rejected the Soviet regime. The prevailing mood in Europe emphasized the importance of preserving individual cultures and governments. On March 11, 1990, Lithuania proudly declared itself a free nation once again, becoming the first to assert its independence and also the first to successfully remove the Soviet army from its territory. Understanding that true freedom required the departure of the occupying forces, Lithuanian politicians were very well aware that until the army withdrew, the nation could not truly be considered free. However, the struggle for independence did not end there. In 1991, January, the Soviet army once again showed its true colors by driving tanks and armored vehicles into the streets of Vilnius. Despite being unarmed, courageous Lithuanians managed to thwart the invasion, defending vital buildings and the TV tower, yet enduring the loss of 14 lives that night. This cruel and unprovoked attack on the newly independent state remains etched in the memory of Lithuanians, evoking both pride in their valor and sadness for the sacrifices made in pursuit of a brighter future. The events of the January 13th require a whole separate episode to discuss because the whole history about it is incredibly intricate and there are a lot of key details that we're missing out on. Following the events, Lithuania embarked on a journey of numerous political, economic, societal, and military reforms as it forged a new nation and aimed to establish a robust government. In 1991, Iceland was amongst the first countries to recognize Lithuania as a sovereign state, and later, in 2004, Lithuania proudly became a member of both NATO and the EU after a successful referendum. In 2015, Lithuania adopted the euro as its currency, signifying remarkable progress, and in 2023, the NATO summit commenced in Vilnius, showcasing the country's growth and international significance. In just 33 years, Lithuania defied all odds, charting a course towards a brighter future where freedom stands as the cornerstone of every citizen's life and progress fuels the nation's aspirations. This journey reflects the indomitable spirit of a nation that persevered through the challenges to shape its own destiny.